Hello, I'm Pastor Joe, and I want to welcome you to this week's 2-Minute Tuesdays Together. For me, spiritual disciplines are such an important part of our faith, and such an important part of the way we grow spiritually and the way that we connect with God and deepen our commitment. And that's why over the last several weeks I've been focusing on spiritual disciplines. We've talked about personal worship. We talked several weeks about prayer. Last week we looked at writing and keeping a spiritual journal. All of these things can help us to grow in our faith. This week I was reading once again about prayer, and I was reminded of the passage in 1 Thessalonians where we're told to pray without ceasing. And I was reading about one of my favorite theologians, John Calvin, and one of the things he really felt was that we ought to pray without ceasing. We ought to be about continuous prayer. But he also knew that we are frail humans. We're weak. We're sinful. And so that's just not going to happen. And so he felt strongly that we should set aside certain times each day. Certain times, that's plural, each day to pray so that we can connect better to God. For John Calvin, prayer was how we connect with the gifts of God. We deepen our awareness of those. So I want to share with you John Calvin's views on prayer, particularly his 5 times that we should be praying, or the 5 types of prayer that we ought to be lifting each and every day. So let's get 2 minutes on the clock and let's go. Now, the first time of the day that John Calvin thought we ought to pray is when we first wake up. Before we move the covers, before our feet touch the floor, we should intentionally enter into a time of prayer. We can pray giving thanks to God for a good night's rest. We can give thanks to God for the gift of a new day. We can pray for God to work in us and through us and to lead us and guide us and to open our eyes to His presence. But let us begin each day, before we even start moving, with a time of prayer. Now, the second time of prayer that John Calvin suggested that we observe is that we pray before we begin our work. It doesn't matter if you're a pastor like me, or if you do something else, or maybe you're not even at work. Before you begin your day's routine and the things that you're going to do that day, just give a prayer to God. First, giving thanks for the gifts and the responsibility that you've been entrusted to, and also a prayer for guidance, that you can be faithful in what God has in store for you. The third time that we should pray is really not just once, but it's multiple times, is before you eat. Now, many of us say a blessing. We should do that every time we eat, whether we're eating at home or eating at a restaurant. Say a prayer of thanksgiving for the food we're about to eat and for God to bless it. But the fourth time that he said we should pray is after we eat, giving thanks for the food, for the nourishment that we received. We're so used to praying before we eat, but he also encourages us to pray after we eat. Now, the last thing that John Calvin suggests in terms of our prayer life is that we pray before we go to bed. Give thanks for the day. Give thanks for all that we've done. Pray for forgiveness for those things maybe we need to be forgiven for opportunities missed. But before we go to bed, let us end our day giving thanks to God. So John Calvin really has us praying without ceasing when we first wake up, before we work, before and after we eat, and before we go to bed. That's a great challenge put before us. Well, look, I thank you for being with us today and watching this video. Please be sure to do those 3 golden things that I ask each week. Hit like, hit share, and subscribe to my channel.